Good morning and most welcome to 12:45 of the Heidegger series. Yes, I will be idling on with Roberto Mangabeira Unger's A Single Universe. And now we got into 12:45. The principle of path dependence, I take off where we left off. I continue where we left off. Affirms that in natural history, whether it is the history of lifeless phenomena or of living beings, a present state of affairs is decisively shaped by a history made of chains of events that may be only loosely connected. Path dependence might also be called hysteresis, were it not for the conventional and restricted usage of this term in contemporary cosmology. To say that they are loosely connected is to claim that the regularities or effective laws underlying each of them fail to mesh together into a unified system. They converge only by their common reliance on more fundamental laws or principles. These fundamental laws or principles may be insufficient to explain the particulars that interests us. The causal chains may be more or less independent on each other. Even within the same science, e.g. geology, with respect to similar phenomena. That is, different kinds of rock formation, for instance. the more independent they are of each other, the more does their outcome appear to us to be marked by chance or contingency. No higher order laws explain why a causal sequence interacted with a certain other succession of causally connected events. Causally connected events rather than with a different one. A consequence of such particularity is that any given outcome depends on a particular history. A history that, without the violation of fundamental laws formulated at a deeper and more general level, might have been different from what it in fact was. The most important source of path dependence in natural history is not the relatively irreversible character of entropy. It is something at once more superficial and more basic. The particularity of nature. Its division into distinct types or kinds merged in different sequences of change in an earlier argument about the two cosmological fallacies. I call the first state of nature. Path dependence is pervasive in the evolutionary history of living beings. If, for example, marsupial mammals are caught in an isolated part of the world, they become subject to non-competitive extinctions. The main axis of mammalian evolution may become the placental line for reasons that have nothing to do with the competitive advantages of marsupials and placentals. The forces influencing the movement of the land masses described by plate tectonics may have no connection with the structural or functional constraints on the evolution of mammalian body types. A different disposition of the land masses might, in this simplified hypothetical, have made the marsupials the predominant mammals. The importance of path dependence becomes unmistakable in the origins and building blocks of the biosphere, as well in the details of Darwinian evolution. As it happens, the nucleic acids serve as the vehicle of genetic invariance. Especially as it is inscribed in DNA. While the proteins perform the crucial role in the operation and development of the regulatory mechanisms on which even a unicellular organism depends. If the roles of these two classes of macromolecules capable of replication had been reversed, an emergent reality might have resulted that resembled life as it has come to be. In some ways, but differed from it in other ways. Thus, it is not only the particular forms of life, but also its basic structure and attributes that appear to be relatively accidental by the light of natural history. This history may not violate any of the effective or fundamental laws exhibited by the world before the emergence of life. However, its cause cannot be inferred from such laws. The same principle applies in the absence of life. Consider an elementary geological example. Ingenious rocks crystallizing from a molten liquid. can be explained directly by reference to the composition, temperature, and cooling rate of the parent magma. The historical element in the explanation remains limited. Composition, temperature, and cooling determine the formation of metamorphic rocks only much more imperfectly. There are multiple pathways to a similar piece of gneiss. Its formation is, to a greater extent, sunk in historical particularity. With the result that even the classification of metamorphic rocks into foliated and unfoliated, which is much looser than the classification of ingenious rocks into phaneretic and aphanitic. Sedimentary rocks produced by the settling of particles through aqueous mediums, by organic secretion, or by direct precipitation out of water or brine, result from a wide range of combinations and sequences. Such series cannot be shown to have simple or close connections to general physical laws. Nor can they rich detail be explained by a small number of laws or of any other sort. classification of sedimentary rocks is complex and tentative. It is the subject matter of a special branch of geology, stratigraphy. Each sedimentary rock has a multifarious individuality of its own. The modification of law-like explanation by irreversible path dependence thus extends beyond the biosphere to the lifeless natural world. If path dependence can operate at the sublunary scale, if path dependence can operate at the sublunary scale of Earth science, it can, in principle, also work at the cosmic scale of the history of the universe. The foundation of its applicability is a basic attribute of nature in the relatively formed and cooled down universe that we observe. That is a discriminate structure consisting of many parts. Once distinct, these parts can have histories of their own. The world investigated by natural history is not a repository of permanent types of kinds, types of living beings, or types of lifeless things, of matter into kinds of objects with distinct attributes and origins. Although often stable for long periods of time, all these types are mutable. They have a history. Despite their stability, they always remain susceptible to transformation. This fact is expressed by a principle of the mutability of types. The mutability of types expresses itself most clearly at the scale of macroscopic objects, of species and of kinds of things. It reaches as well into the microscopic world. DNA, once created, is tenaciously stable and strikingly similar throughout the biosphere. However, it did not exist even relatively late in the history of the planet, as well as of the universe. That it is subject to change both by mutation and by our intentional intervention, we already know for a fact. that periodic table and the elementary particles described by the standard model of particle physics have a much older history, going back to the very early moments of the present universe. Nevertheless, on our present cosmological views, they too have not existed forever. They have a genealogy that we are not yet able to fully describe. That they are susceptible to change on a much larger time scale, as well as on a short time scale through our forceful intervention, is therefore the only reasonable conjecture. The alternative is to suppose that a natural kind with a definite historical origin has no future history other than to remain forever stable and identical to itself. The principle of the mutability of the types at least as applied to the species of living things and to macroscopic object, may seem trivial to the point of self-evidence. In fact, it is astonishing in the reach of its implications. Consider its significance first in a particular domain, the realm of living beings, then for our thinking about the universe. In the biosphere, the natural kinds are the species. They are often remarkably stable. Many have barely changed for hundreds of millions of years. The stability of species has a threefold basis in the constancy of DNA and the modesty of its variations. In the unmatched power of the function that this constancy performs, the preservation of genetic invariance, and in the very restricted repertory of structural forms and materials with which autonomous morphogenesis works. Nevertheless, despite all these forces, there is a prodigious history of speciation. Marked by both bursts of innovation and long periods of relative stability. We cannot infer this history. In its significant details from laws of any sort. There is no permanent repertory of forms of life, no cave. No species has a ticket to last as long as the planet. What holds for speciation holds more generally for the emergence and transformation of natural kinds. In its familiar cool-down state, the universe exists in clearly differentiated form, which physics is tempted to understand by analogy to the mathematical idea of a differentiable manifold, composed of distinct structures or of parts interacting in certain ways. All of these parts however elementary, are historical entities subject to transformation. at any moment something can happen that is absolutely new. Not only unprecedented, but also impossible to predict on the basis of the regularities exhibited by the previous history of nature. One such novelty is the emergence on the planet Earth of the kinds of beings that we described as living. The principle of mutability of types is thus not confined to life and to the life sciences. It is a general feature of what I earlier called the first state of nature. In this state, nature is differentiated, but not aspect of its differentiation. Expressed in a set of types or natural kinds is essential or eternal. The principle of mutability of types is only derivatively a biological principle. It is in the first instance a cosmological principle. It requires us to import into cosmology some ways of thinking that we associate with natural history. It contradicts the project of classical ontology, which sought to provide an account of the abiding varieties of being. It conflicts as well with any practice of science that treats a permanent structure of being as one of its presuppositions. An important and surprising aspect of the mutability of types is the transformation of the sense or the way in which they are types. That is to say, of the nature of the distinctions among them. One species of animals does not differ from another in the same way in which one type of rock differs from another. Indeed, one igneous rock does not differ from another in the way in which one metamorphic rock differs from another. The process of formation and of change impart a distinct character to the separateness of the type. This fact connects the mutability of types to a third principle of natural history, the co-evolution of phenomena and of the laws governing them. It can be generalized in the following form in its broadest cosmological application. Not only does the universe lack a stable and permanent repertory of natural kinds, but the way in which the natural kinds differ from one another is also subject to change. If nature in its first and normal state presents itself as a structured and differentiable manifold, the character of its divisions is as impermanent as their content. The laws and symmetries by which we explain events in natural history manifest themselves together with the phenomena whose workings we use to explain them. In parenthesis, in this context, I often use the term regularities and laws as synonyms. Give that symmetries and constants do not play in natural history the role that they may play in physics and cosmology. Contrary to the claims of strong reductionism, such laws could not and cannot be inferred from the laws governing the rest of nature, or of the nature as it existed before these phenomena appeared. All we can say is that they are compatible with those prior laws. Nothing in what I called weak reductionism, much less in any way of thinking about science and nature, that has rid itself of the illusions of weak reductionism, prevents us from regarding the law-like regularities of any part of natural history as coeval with the phenomena that they help us to explain. To represent these regularities as part of the eternal and timeless framework of the universe is a philosophical move with no operational meaning or justification. Something on the whiteboard. The phenomena change implies laws are changing. Phenomena change, so therefore law change. Very important point here. It needs to be done in this slow manner to be understandable, to get a grip. I will start off there. I think it's a good sentence, I will repeat it. To represent these regularities as part of the eternal and timeless framework of the universe is a philosophical move with no operational meaning or justification. The phenomena change. And so, together with them, does the way in which they change. That is to say, their laws. This and that is the principle of co-evolution of phenomena and laws. A third aspect of the explanatory approach that natural history habitually uses in the history that the naturalist studies, change changes discontinuously and repeatedly. Once again, the range of application of the principle of co-evolution of phenomena and laws is not conterminous with the limits of the biosphere. It too extends backwards to lifeless nature, and thus has an open frontier of application to the history of the universe. The methods of change, which we express as explanatory laws, shift with the appearance of life. They change again with the emergence of multicellular organisms. And then again with sexual reproduction and the Mendelian mechanisms. They change with the emergence of consciousness. And its equipment by language. These are not just changes in the kinds of beings, in this instance, living beings that exist. They are also changes in the way in which phenomena change, as well as in the distinctions between them, as the broader interpretation of the mutability of types suggest. the co-evolution of phenomena and of laws outreaches the biosphere. It characterizes geology or earth science as well as applied and hybrid disciplines such as plate tectonics and the science of tides. In all these applications, it is closely associated with both the influence of path dependence and the mutability of types. And of the distinction of natural kinds from one another. The formation of Christus, for example, represents a mechanism for the reproduction of invariance that is very different from the genetic replication in the biosphere, and that conforms to entirely different principles. Where does the range and application of the principle of co-evolution of phenomena and laws stop? Nowhere, it seems, short of the entire universe and its history. The co-evolution of regularities and phenomena that we observe on the planet Earth must be susceptible to occurrence anywhere in the universe and at any time in its history. There is no reason to suppose that it is limited to either a particular scale of phenomena or to a certain period of universal history. The cosmological application of the principle of co-evolution of phenomena and laws does not repeat the error of the first cosmological fallacy. The life and earth sciences have never conformed to the Newtonian paradigm. Although many attempts have been made to obtain their surrender. What the redefinition of cosmology as a historical science does force us to confront is the problem that we call in this book the conundrum of the meta-laws. It follows from these considerations that nothing in this argument about the relevance of natural history to cosmology has turned on the idea that the principles of path dependence, of the mutability of types, and of the co-evolution of the phenomena and their laws are not unique to the domain of living beings. They are not. Their range of application extends unmistakably beyond the boundaries of the life world to lifeless nature. As a result, we can mobilize for cosmological use a way of thinking that remains untainted by the illusions of vitalism. contemporary biology has opened the way to this conclusion by its development. In the context of life, of ideas that enjoy varied and demonstrated non-biological applications, complexity, self-organization, punctuated equilibrium, critical thresholds, and their endogenous but catastrophic undoing. Punctuated equilibrium, do remember that one. I think it's a very good helper to understand what this is about. Punctuated equilibrium, I think, is coming from Stephen Jay Gould, the most, once upon a time, very despised biologist, and then repented like Barbarossa, going on his knees to the Pope and begging for forgiveness. It's interesting that his term come up here. By developing biology as a science of structure as well as of function, and by reinterpreting and revising the neo-Darwinian synthesis in evolutionary biology in the light of this intellectual program. It has torn down the false walls between life and the lifeless. This intellectual program makes it possible to represent the principles of natural history, as I have here discussed them, in a fashion overriding the difference between life and its absence. Such an approach does not imply that the biosphere lacks distinctive features. On the contrary, it has so many of them that its emergence is unpredictable and unaccountable on the basis of the laws of nature prior to the beginnings of life. However, the specificity of life on Earth is only a special case of a pervasive phenomenon in the history of the universe, the appearance of the new manifest in the mutability of types and in the co-evolution of phenomena and physics and laws, recall what are conventionally described as the distinctive attributes of life. The reproduction of genetic invariance through the medium of an enduring biochemical structure, DNA. The development of an apparatus, the organism, that can literally have no purpose but that acts through regulatory mechanisms as if it were purpose-driven. Something that Jacques Monod called teleonomy without teleology. And the formation of this apparatus through independent morphogenesis of these three attributes, the first two have rough counterparts in other natural phenomena. It is surprisingly the third attribute, the independent self-construction of the body, which at first seems to be the only lowly instrument or embodiment of the other two attributes. That is most distinctive. The ontogenetic development of the organism represents a striking instance both of the mutability of type and of the coevolution of phenomena and laws. A new kind of being appears, forming itself in the novel way, exhibiting unexpected regularities. I think I sum up here. Well, 45 it is, not 44. Well, phenomena change, laws change. So he painstakingly goes through each instance to clearly show that phenomena doesn't follow laws. We can infer laws, we can use them as tools, but there is, as was said earlier here, to represent these regularities as part of the eternal and timeless framework of the universe is a philosophical move with no operational meaning or justification. I think that's a fantastic point there. When we do that, we infer something not of observation, and it's bound to badly limit whatever we can think, whatever we could do, becomes senseless, meaningless law building for its own sake. So the cosmological fallacy is having a sort of machinery that spits out laws